I'm Janice Fitzgerald, and I'm serving as our host for the Presbyterian Coach Network. It is my privilege to introduce our speakers today. Our speakers today are both very active members of the Presbyterian Coach Network. Cindy Thomas is an elder at Geneva Presbyterian Church in Canton, Michigan. She is an ACC credentialed life coach. And Cindy was trained at the Institute for Life Coach Training in Auburn Theological Seminary, and she is a founding partner of Sacred Dance Coaching and Guiding. And I love the title, Cindy.
Thank you.
I remember about a year ago when you and Bryan were still working on that.
Yeah.
And Cindy's co-presenter is Bryan Smith. Bryan is a Presbyterian pastor, also at Geneva Presbyterian Church in Canton, Michigan. Bryan is an ICF ACC credentialed life coach. He's also certified as a nature-based human development guide by the Animas Valley Institute. And Bryan is also a founding partner of Sacred Dance Coaching and also a founding partner of Guiding or of Seminary of the Wild. And sometime you're going to have to ask him about that because that also is really fascinating. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy and to Bryan, and I am looking, Dana. Let's see.
Yes, I'm
okay,
here.
We do have the the recording went back on, so we're all right with that. I had paused it at one point. Take it away, Cindy and Bryan, and we'll be back with you or to thank you in an hour.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Janice. And thank you, everybody, for being here. This is really exciting for me. This is the first time I've done anything like this. So I'm a little nervous and a lot excited about presenting this to you all. And I'm so glad you're all here. What we're calling shadow coaching isn't really a formal tool or an official coaching system. In fact, it really didn't even have a name until we started putting these things together. It really comes as a convergence of several different streams of coaching and spirituality and theology that we've been exposed to over the years. And it's like an organic approach to coaching that has a powerful impact on clients who feel stuck and can't seem to move forward with the resources that they have at hand, the things that they know that they can draw on. So we coaches are taught that our clients are creative, resourceful, and whole. And that's foundational to what we believe as coaches about our clients. And it's very true, but sometimes there are aspects of a client's wholeness that are hidden, and that as coaches, we can help bring them out of the shadows. They're hidden in the shadows, completely outside the awareness of the client's consciousness. And I'd like to share a poem with you by Daniel Goleman that sets the stage for what shadow coaching is all about. And he says, Janice, if we could get the slide up there. Maybe not. Okay. The range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. And because we fail to notice that we fail to notice, there's little we can do to change until we notice how failing to notice shapes our thoughts and deeds. Let's read through that one more time and let it really sink in. The range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. And because we fail to notice that we fail to notice, there is little we can do to change until we notice how failing to notice shapes our thoughts and deeds. And I'd like to ask you, as you see these words or hear them written, I'd like to ask you what thoughts or responses they might bring up in you, or how you see the connections between his insights, Goldman's insights, and coaching, and what we do as coaches.
And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yes.
This is Beth.
Hi, Beth.
By way of introduction, I'm a member of Grace Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Virginia. I'm an elder. I'm working on my certification. Still got a good handful of hours to go before I can apply for my credential. But I actually am working now with a client whose wholeness is very hidden from this person, and so this is very exciting for me.
Oh.
But I think, you know, what's this statement, you know, we fail to notice that we fail to notice, and this shapes our thought and deed. I think it's a very powerful reminder for us as coaches to pause and fine-tune our awareness for the things that we might be missing, because it's so easy to miss so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the hidden resources in what we fail to notice are things, unless we notice them, we can't draw on them. We can't bring them to the light, bring them into the their resourcefulness. Any other thoughts about that?
It's Gary Eller in Omaha.
Hi, Gary.
Hi. The Goldman quote reminds me of the old Christopher Bolus line about the unthought known, and that the person who's being coached does know at some level, but is not aware of that which is known. And so
Right.
Coaching helps make known the unknown, make the unconscious conscious, to paraphrase that other stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Growing in our awareness expands the range of what we can think and do. If what we're aware of is the range of what we can think and do is really limited by our awareness, and what is outside of our awareness is something that we cannot bring in as a resource. So coaching removes the limitations from what we can from the limitation of what we fail to notice. What we fail to notice can be brought into the light by the interaction between a coach and a client. But sometimes our failure to notice goes deeper than just overlooking something. Sometimes it's really hidden in a very dark place in the shadows that takes something beyond just shining a light on it before we can see it. These are deeply hidden realities of our character that we can't change, according to Goldman's poem. We can't change until we notice them. We can't make changes to our lives. We can't make changes to that. We can't make changes to our character until we notice them. So shadow coaching is a powerful way to create the awareness of those things that we fail to notice. And one of the reasons we fail to notice them is because we've gone to great lengths to make sure we don't notice them. The things that are in the shadow are things that we find threatening in some way. And that process of putting them in the shadow begins long before we're even aware that we're doing it. So shadow coaching touches on a number of our ICF core competencies, but the one that I think is most directly related to it is the core competency of awareness. And if we could get that slide of that one up there, Janice. Thank you. Integrating and accurately evaluating multiple sources of information and making interpretations that help the client to gain awareness and thereby achieve agreed upon results. As Daniel Goleman said in our poem, we're not aware, and we have the things that we're not aware of, we have no measure of control over. These things are the things that we don't notice, and we're especially don't notice them, the ones that we don't want to notice. But our wholeness depends on us being aware. So some of the bulleted points under creating the awareness core competency that are particularly relevant to shadow coaching are, the first one is identifies for the client his or her underlying concerns, typical and fixed ways of perceiving himself or herself and the world, differences between the facts and the interpretation, and disparities between thoughts, feelings, and action.
Janice, do you have that slide?
You want me to read it again? Yeah.
So I think just put the screen, I think. So
Okay.
just the first, go back one slide, Janice.
Before that, Janice.
There you go.
There we go. The things we don't notice have a powerful impact on our perception of the world. But when those things are the things we don't notice, like around us, have a powerful impact on our perception of the world. But when those things are aspects of ourselves, of who we are, the impact is far greater, because they're churning out reactions and emotions and feelings within us that have a powerful reality in how we relate to the world, how we perceive the world, and how we behave in the world. These aspects of our wholeness that we're aware of are like a blind spot that keeps our vision small, and they lead to a distorted interpretation of facts. We can't see the reality when we're seeing from through a lens that we don't even know is there right in front of us. The next bullet point that is related to shadow coaching would be communicates broader perspectives to clients and inspires commitment.
Hold on. Sorry, Janice. Can you go back? We have the second bullet point of the same previous slide.
Yeah.
Just, Cindy, make sure you just tell Janice when to switch the slide.
Okay. Communicates broader perspectives to clients and inspires commitment to shift their viewpoints and find new possibilities for action. And again, the aspects of our wholeness that we are unaware of limits both our perspectives and our possibilities. They contain resources that go untapped because we don't even know what they are. We don't even know they're there. And then finally, the bulletin, the next one, Janice. Thank you. Helps clients to see the different interrelated factors that affect them and their behaviors, thoughts, emotions, body, and background. And this bullet point, I think, is especially true of shadow work. The aspects of our wholeness that we keep hidden in the shadow, they don't just disappear. They're always there. They're always present, even though they're outside of our awareness. And they continue to operate, churning out emotions, agendas, and even actions, the source of which they're entirely below our consciousness. We're not even aware of where they're coming from. In our lives, sometimes we'll see ourselves behaving in a way that seems to be out of character. Oh, where did that come from? And these are shadow realities that are working their way out in our behavior, our actions, our words, but we don't even know where they're coming from. But because they lie outside our awareness, they're outside also not just of our understanding of where they're coming from, but also they're outside of our volition. And they have a measure of power that goes unchecked by our conscious minds. And in effect, they control us rather than serving us. Their reality, their presence is there to serve us. But when we're not aware of what they're doing, they actually are in control because they're outside of our ability to evaluate and make conscious decisions about.
All right.
Bryan, you want to start up from there?
Yeah, so we really want to make sure that we're kind of clear about the terminology because shadow is one of those terms that has a long lineage. It's got different people contributing to it. I think Carl Jung was perhaps the first psychologist who kind of talked about the shadow as basically being a part of us that we really are unconscious of and unaware of. And one of the people that I have found really helpful who describes shadow work a lot is Bill Plotkin. in a book called Wild Mind, he talks about the shadow this way. He says the shadow, next slide, Janice. He says the shadow is not what we know about ourselves, don't like, and keep hidden. Rather, the shadow is what is true about us that we don't know at all, and if accused of it, would adamantly and sincerely deny. So you might think, well, I know I have a temper at times, I know I can be pretty outspoken, I know I can do those things. And maybe these things that you don't like about yourself necessarily, or you think perhaps need to have, be kind of kept down through the force of your will, that would be different. That would be parts of us that we actually are aware of and we're just not really happy about. The shadow would be something that if somebody were to actually say to you, this is a quality I see in you, you would sincerely, without any reservation or deception, say, I don't believe that's true about me. So the shadow is really a place of deep, unconscious place, and it gets formed early in life, probably really early in childhood. Some people think even before we're sort of able to think rationally, to help us to navigate what we are going to call our programs for happiness. So next slide, we're going to name a few of the things that we come into the world needing. With the first one, the next slide, Janice, being about our security and survival. So we come into the world, obviously as infants, we're very aware of our vulnerability, very aware of our need for other people to take care of us, and we're not going to make it at some level. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we survive in the world? How do we find some security around us? The second program for happiness would be around affection and esteem. And these terms come from Thomas Keating and some of his work around human psychology. So we also need to be loved, and we need to be embraced and accepted, and we need to fit in, and we need to know they're part of a group, that if we don't have that sense of being loved and embraced by other people, then our little psyches, when they come to the world, are going to be devastated. They're not going to survive that in a sort of helpful way. So we say, how do we make sure people love us, accept us, hold us, want to be around us? That's another program. The third one I want to think about is power and control. Like, how do I begin to exert some degree of initiative and some degree of control and power in my own environment? How can I live and act in ways I'm not completely at the mercy of someone else? So we come into the world and we need these things to be met. We want to feel secure. We want to survive. We want to be loved. And what happens early in life is that we begin to realize that all of who we are, the fullness of our humanity, all aspects of our psyche and personality might not really be accepted, might not really be affirmed, first by our parents, for example. We come into the world as creatures that don't have much of a screen or much of a capacity to sort of monitor our thoughts or our actions. And so we come into the world as bundles of energy, and maybe right away, people would say to us, maybe our parents, can't you just sit still? Can't you just stop that? You shouldn't do that to your brother. That's not how we behave. And you begin to realize, certain parts of me, certain impulses, energies, they're not really welcome to express themselves without me getting myself in a lot of trouble or risking mom and dad's disapproval. And so it's like these guards of the psyche decide, what are we going to do with this energy, this perspective? Sometimes a lot of issues around the body get put in shadow, especially around the issues of sexuality, for example. And so we begin to sort of, in the terms of Robert Bly, we begin to throw these parts of ourselves into what he calls the long black bag we drag behind us. And we begin to decide, I really can't show up in that way. I can't really act that way. I can't speak that way if I'm going to be somebody who's going to make mom and dad or whoever happy, my parents happy. And so we begin to kind of do the sorting process. And parts of us get set off into a distant land. We ask ourselves, what do I have to do to survive, to fit in? And some choices made by us in our psyche, again, it's not necessarily a rational choice, but things get decided what can see the light of day and what can't see the light of day. And once they go back in the shadow, we're not really aware at times as time goes on that's even there anymore. So it's challenging work because we're asking people if they want to grow in their wholeness to begin to integrate parts of themselves that they really don't even know that they have necessarily. And so we're kind of at the mercy of timing here. Like something begins to happen where these parts of us begin to come home. And I find the story of the prodigal son to be a really instructive story about this kind of work. So you have this family, right? Everybody's kind of coexisting, but then you have this part of the family who decides that he's not going to abide by normal customs and family traditions and values. So he's going to go off somewhere. And Jesus says he goes off into a distant land. I'm going to kind of use that as a metaphor for the psyche in terms of shadow land. He goes off in a distant place. And the shadow figure begins to manifest behavior that certainly is profoundly displeasing to other parts of the family. So he squanders his resources. He ends up with prostitutes. He violates the Jewish tradition by eating pig's food. So he really is a figure that goes off into a place, these energies, these desires, these carnal issues go off into a distant land. And then it says, when he came to himself, he decides to come home. And so there's usually moments in life where situations will arrive where a shadow energy or a shadow figure will begin to sort of decide, you know what? It's time to head home. It's time to make my presence known. And so the younger brother heads back, right? And then what happens is the father sees him and he welcomes this shadow figure home. And he decides to throw a party for him. And he decides that this shadowy one, his own son, is going to be celebrated and part of the family now. And so he welcomes him back. You might call that shadow integration. He's back home. Great, I'm glad you're here. But there's this third figure, I'm going to call it the ego, who is very offended that this whole thing is going on. Like, this is not my brother. I don't want any connection to this reality. It's been such a violation of what I hold dear. I just can't join in welcoming home this long lost part of the family, in a sense. And so what happens at that point, right, is the father then has to shift his attention from welcoming home the prodigal to saying, well, how do I help this other part of the family, the older brother, move from defiant rejection of this part of our family to being able to welcome him too. And so there's this work around how do I do that? And the father tries, right? The father tries to help shift consciousness for the older brother. He says, this is your brother. He's not just my son, he's your brother. And so the father has the idea that somehow this family is better off with everybody being a part of it. And the father clearly believes that even though the shadow figure has gone off and done these things, that he still brings something of value, something to be celebrated, something to be loved as he comes home. So for me, that story is a wonderful sense that as coaches, I think what we try to do is to help people connect to what I would call the father in that story, the father consciousness in that story. To how do I begin to welcome home every part of me, so somehow my identity, my possibilities in life become expanded by that. So I want you to think just sort of creatively here for a second. If we just think about the younger brother as being a shadow figure, what kinds of resources or what kinds of valuable things might this younger brother be bringing back with him to his family? Any thoughts about seeing him in a different lens than through the older brother? Like, what's he bringing that might be a resource?
He now has he's seen more of the world, presumably, than his brother, and has a wider context.
Mm-hmm.
He's interested in giving back rather than, give me my inheritance. He's willing to do some work and also contribute to the larger family economics.
Mm-hmm. I think for me too, he also brings what I'm going to call an adventurous spirit. So the older brother is responsible. He's out there in the field. He's honoring the rules. He's sweating sun up to sunrise. He's the responsible and the faithful one. But this other brother brings sort of an adventurous spirit. I'm not sure that I want to say follow all the rules. And just thinking through, how could an adventurous spirit, or I'm just not going to follow all the rules because they're there. Like, I'm going to think for myself, and I might take risks, and I might fail. So, and he might even know something about grace, for example, which I think he does, that the older brother might not know. So he has these sort of attributes, qualities, energies that could actually be if integrated, could actually be of great service to the family, which is, again, my metaphor basically for the human personality. So that's sort of the idea that even what the ego views as being undesirable, but larger perspective, the Father's perspective, actually there is something to be loved and valued there. So that's part of the idea behind shadow work. And part of what makes this interesting is that Plotkin points out that there are different kinds of shadows. Cindy's going to kind of walk us through maybe some ways to think about at least two different kinds of shadow in our personalities.
Bill Plotkin, who Bryan quoted before. Janice, could we have that next quote up, please? He says that shadow characteristics can be either negative, what the ego would consider beneath it, which are some of the things that Bryan talked about, possibly being overly aggressive, or maybe greed, or things that the ego does not want to recognize, or positive, what the ego would consider above it. We might call these sinister shadow and the golden shadow. And when we think of things in our shadow, things that we don't want to know about ourselves, and the things we want to hide from both ourselves and the world, it's easy to kind of limit our minds to those typically negative, destructive, shameful things like anger and jealousy and greed and so on. Things that we perceive will cause people to think less of us, and things that we perceive will cause us to think less of ourselves, things that are wounding to the ego, basically. But that's not the only thing that we can hide in the shadow. Plotkin goes on to say, Janice, can we have the next one, please? The golden shadow contains traits our egos regard as too positive to be conceivably ours, qualities we consider highly virtuous, elevated, or otherwise exemplary, like selfless generosity, perhaps, or poetic eloquence, or creative urges like spontaneous public singing. These are things that are very positive and laudable characteristics, but we just kind of put them away because we think that they're just not they couldn't possibly be ours. They're just the too good to be true kind of realities. And when I think about that, my mind went to the story of Gideon that we're all familiar with from the book of Judges. Gideon was somebody who was basically raised in a very troubled time in Israel's history. It was a time when Israel was being victimized by the Midianites. They would come and they would steal all their crops, and they would just humiliate and devastate them. And in order to, Gideon was a farmer, and in order to thresh his wheat, he was hiding from the Midianites, and he was threshing his wheat in a wine press. Now, threshing wheat is usually done on a high, like a hilltop or something like that, a flat surface, where they would throw up the wheat into the air, and the wind would come along and it would blow the lighter hull of the wheat away, and the heavier wheat kernels would fall to the ground, and they would be then collected and put away. But Gideon was trying to do this in a wine press in order to hide from the Midianites. Now, the wine press, on the contrary, was a big pit that was in the ground. And so he was down in this pit, trying with no wind, trying to throw the wheat up and have the chaff blown away, which is not exactly a courageous thing to be doing. Certainly understandable, because he was doing what he needed to do to keep himself safe, but it's not something that you would call courage. Mm-hmm. So he's down there in this pit, probably with wheat chaff in his hair and just a real mess. And along comes this angel, and I can picture the angel sort of peering over the edge of the wine press and looking down in there into the top and saying, God is with you, mighty warrior. And Gideon's response is, what? Who you talking to? There's nobody else here. I'm certainly not a warrior. And he responds by saying, pardon me, Lord. He's very polite. He's, pardon me, Lord, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. So he created an identity for himself. And it was an identity that had probably been imposed on him, or encouraged, or limited by the circumstances around him, both the Midianites, maybe his family, the reputation of the family. He says, I'm the least of my family. My clan is the least. These are identities that have been created for him. But God says, no, there's something else in you, and something else is, you are a mighty warrior, and I have a job for you. And because I have a job for you, you have everything you need in order to carry it out. I will be with you, but you are my chosen person to do this. So the angel tells him, go in the power you have. That power is already there. His identity as a mighty warrior has already been sealed in his psyche, but it's completely out of reach of his consciousness, completely out of his awareness. But what the angel is doing, I think, is what we do as coaches. The angel is calling that out. The angel is saying, this is what I see in you. This is what your true identity is, and I am calling that out. I'm making it aware. I'm making you aware of who you truly are, and who that is. You are a mighty warrior, and you are someone who is called to do God's work, and that work is going to be saving Israel from the Midianites. And then he goes through this whole plan and tells them what to do later on. Another passage I was thinking about when I thought about this is Psalm 139, that says, we're fearfully and wonderfully made, that God says that I knit you together in your mother's womb. From our very inception, we are all equipped with the seed of everything we need to live the life that God intends for us. It's already there, and it's waiting to be discovered and nurtured and called into action. But because of the forces that Bryan talked about, and some of the forces that we see acting in Gideon's life, that identity, or parts of that identity, because we are aware of some parts of it, but some very valuable, essential parts of that identity are hidden away in what we are calling the shadow, or what Bryan also called that long black bag that we drag around behind us. But Gideon then basically says, prove it. That is something that I have never even considered part of myself. That is something that I would completely reject as having any possibility of being a reality in my life. And so he says, prove it. So he puts out this fleece. And then, of course, the angel does what he needs to do in order to have the proof that this is a reality, that this is who he is being called to be, because it's who he is. And we're not going to be actually working miracles with a fleece for our clients. But one thing coaches can do is provide a fleece in the form of observations that we make about our clients. We can point out things that we see in them that they may not be seeing in themselves as they're revealed through our conversations with them. We can also point them in the direction of these things by questioning, saying things like, when have you ever, and then go on with a question about, when have you ever done something that maybe is part of this shadow, but has emerged in the client's life, but they've kind of overlooked. We can do it by saying to them, has anyone ever told you that you have an eloquent way of saying things? Oh, no, that can't be true. But has anyone ever told you that? Bring those things into the awareness. So those are the ways that we could, when the client says prove it, we don't have a fleece, but we do have tools as coaches to help them, to help uncover that and make that visible in their lives. It's easy for us to see the ways that we want to keep that sinister shadow hidden. But I want to ask the question, does anybody have any ideas about why we would want to keep this golden shadow, this shining, beautiful gift that we have, hidden away? What might be some of the motives behind putting that into the shadow? Because we do it, we decide to do it.
Some of it would seem to me to be messages that we get as children and sometimes as Christians. I think messages about humility, and we confuse humility with not claiming that part of ourselves that might actually be kind of amazing.
Yeah,
right on.
That's a great observation. Anything else?
Anybody ever heard, like, who do you think you are? I have an Australian client who says that there's a phrase in Australia, something like not standing, like not having as a poppy, not standing too tall. So I'm not quite have it right, but like you're not supposed to stand up too tall. You're really not supposed to try to rise above anybody else. So it's best to just stay low, right?
Yeah. I know a lot of us as coaches have a hard time also with the idea of getting clients, of promoting ourselves, of putting ourselves out there.
Seems to me, this is scary again. It seems to me like another possibility is that we hesitate because we want to create a false sense of expectation. We might not be able to maintain that idea, this golden shadow. It may come in ebb and flow.
Yeah. And piggybacking on that too is there's the comparisons that we have. If we can't do it perfectly as well, be the best at it, we compare ourselves with other people, and that keeps us from wanting to put it out there. Any others?
Thank you.
Thank you. And sometimes I think that there's safety in staying small. Sometimes these beautiful gifts that we have are things that can be threatening because they're demanding of us. They demand a lot. I have one of my sons was very, very talented at in karate. I mean, he could just watch somebody do something with his body and he could do it. But the minute it started to become demanding, he pulled back. He didn't want to go past that just sort of ordinary level that he was able to do. So there's a demand on us to develop and grow and put these things out there where they might not be appreciated or might even be criticized. So we decide that sometimes it's safer just to keep them hidden away. Anything else before we move on?
Yeah, we probably should keep going, because I know, Janice, we're stopping at 10 after, I'm assuming, if that's,
Okay.
we're trying to make time ourselves.
Okay. All right. I just want to quote this one quote from Marianne Williamson before we go back farther. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate.
Next slide, Janice.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Janice, next slide. Here we go. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. Bryan?
Yeah, so that's just really powerful. That statement about our deepest fear is really our gold, in a sense. So, so we carry along this long black bag. It's got golden shadow and sinister shadow, and at some point, again, for us to be whole, like the prodigal son, our goal is at some point to be able to consciously participate with welcoming these parts of us home. So the shadow really is at a place we don't know or sincerely believe we don't have. We can't access it simply in normal way. So what happens is the shadow, like the prodigal son, on its own, those parts of us decide somehow to begin to manifest themselves to us in non-typical ways. So here are some ways, where's places to find shadow. So the first slide, Janice, would talk about one of the places to find shadow is in dreams, right? So dream figures can often be wonderfully evocative shadow depictions. Sometimes like we have to be unconscious, I think, for shadow figures to actually say, okay, the normal ego control is not going to keep me from manifesting myself. The ego's asleep right now, so I'm going to be able to manifest myself. An example for me was I had a dream 2 years ago where I had helped to capture Bashar al-Assad. It's amazing, right? The dictator of Syria. I had him in a cage on my driveway. And I was waiting for the police to show up to take this horrible dictator into custody. And as I'm waiting for the police to show up, I'm standing by the cage, and Assad says to me, looks me in the eye, and he says, you know I'm getting out. And when I get out, I'm going to kill you. Before I kill you, I'm going to kill every person that you love. And he said it with such a determination, a confidence. He had no qualms at all that he was going to be able to pull this off, and that he was going to be able to indulge his desires for revenge, that kind of thing. And I woke up and I thought, oh my gosh, who is that? Who is that figure? Because he would ask me, Bryan, would you in any way see yourself as being, a ruthless dictator? I'd say, no, I'm a pastor. I mean, I'm a good guy. I'm somebody that's compassionate, caring, which I think those are also true. But this part of me that the ego, again, because the ego is the one that sees these figures through its own lens. The dream ego sees this figure as being threatening, destructive, dictatorial. But again, it could be other factors like single-mindedness, confidence, an ability to take action. When the ego sees it as being threatening, it might cast it as a dictator, but it might also have those qualities, might also be helpful. So sometimes dream figures show up in very scary clothing, but they're there to manifest a part of us that's asking for us really to take a look and to begin to interact with it in a way beyond merely judging and rejecting it. So dreams. So I tell people, dreams are a great way to sort of, if you want to have a pipeline to some shadow figures, keep a dream journal by your by your bed. Part of my coaching work actually is when people bring dreams, we work on those sometimes to do this kind of work. Second thing would be probably the most common one is next slide, Janice, is people with whom you have a strong emotional reaction, positive or negative. So part of what we do with our shadow is we project it onto other people, and we'll call those people screens. So we're projecting the parts of us that we don't want to claim for ourselves onto other people. And so people could be either a positive or a negative screen. And so a negative screen would be, you know, you're around somebody and you just, for some reason, you just can't stand them. It just drives you crazy. And it's not the case that every other person has that reaction, but for you, this person just kind of gets under your skin. Like you just can't believe how arrogant they are, how full of themselves they are. You just can't believe, you know, that these people are like that. And it just drives you crazy. That would be somebody who's being a screen for your sinister shadow. And maybe the other way would be you see somebody who's just like, oh my gosh, they're amazing. I could never, write like that. I could never possibly sing like that. That person is just, you know, almost kind of we do with our celebrities in our culture. Like it's almost a sense of hero worship. Like, oh my gosh, they're so great. And so these people do a helpful job of being a screen that helps us to see in our judgments of them, our interpretations of them, things about ourselves that are inviting us to sort of own back. I again had a very strong experience of this. I was on a very intentional shadow retreat actually for 4 or 5 days. And part of what we do in these is we talk about how we are projecting our shadows on other people at the event. So there was a woman there who prior to the event, we needed to all get some bottled water for a while because we were going to be on the land. And we were staying at a house and it was about a half mile from the store. I just happened to ask her, would you mind, because she was the one who had a car, would you mind driving us to the store to get some water? And she said, no, I don't feel like driving. And I just sat there like completely dumbfounded, like, wait, you're not going to drive the 4 of us to the store a half mile so we don't have to like carry these water bottles back because you don't feel like it? It blew my mind. And I was sitting there thinking, God, how selfish is so sad. I can't believe it. I actually used stronger words than that. And so when we got to this shadow event, we had this sort of time of owning our projections. And she said to me, you know, in part of this council meeting, she said, you know, I really judged you because I felt pressure from you to do what I didn't want to do. And part of the way I saw you was like, so often in my life, men tell me what they want, and my only job is to say yes. And so I really reacted to you primarily as another male figure trying to exert your privilege over me. And so she kind of had to own back, you know, in terms of her own reclaiming some of her own power and that kind of thing. And then I did the same thing with her. It's like when you made that choice, I just saw you as being so selfish, self-absorbed. And what I had to own back was that she had a freedom to make a decision in that situation that I never would have even allowed myself to think about, because my whole approach in life was, of course I'm going to meet other people's needs. Of course I'm going to, if I can help, I'm going to help out. That's who I am. That's what I do. So I never would have even thought that if I didn't want to, that could have been a legitimate choice, because other people's needs always supersede mine. So I had to sort of own back this freedom, this capacity she had to act independently of other people's expectations. And part of my reaction to her was really a jealousy that she was able to manifest that kind of freedom when I never would have allowed myself. So part of my work with that has been, how do I reclaim, the capacity to be internally driven at times to do what makes the most sense in a situation without feeling a compulsion to always act the same way. So people provide a wonderful place for you to become aware of shadow material. We couldn't go through the other three. I know our time is running out here. Situations, the next slide, Janet. Situations and topics about which you are tempted to not tell the whole truth. What are some things that you don't really want, you're aware as you're saying it, that maybe there are parts of this that you really want to keep hidden. That could be a sign of some shadow material. Or complete the sentence, the next slide. The one thing that's absolutely not true or true about me is, right? There's one thing I know to be true, that I would always, that's probably a place that might be a little bit of an arrow pointing, that could be beware, there might be shadow material on ahead. Or final one, Janice, the next slide, episodes of acting out or overreacting, recognize as out of character. So maybe you have clients who will say, you know, in a call, I have no idea, I just reacted with such strong whatever. I'm so embarrassed I did that. I don't know what came over me is a common phrase. Using some more perhaps evangelical language, the devil made me do it. In severe forms, you might find people who've done something horrible and people say, that's the last person I would have expected. Right? That person just seems so nice. So there are times when the shadow, if it's not integrated, begins to exert more and more pressure to be manifested. And if we're not working with it, at times we can get hijacked by it and do great damage to ourselves and other people. So part of this is to pay attention to these sort of moments of conscious breaking through, and then say, okay, now I have a chance to sort of do some work here. And so Cindy's, I think, going to kind of share with us maybe some questions and some action steps that we found to be helpful as we kind of work with people who get in the area of shadow.
Yeah. Bryan just went over a lot of ways that in a conversation with a client, we can pick up on some of these clues that there's a shadow at work by paying attention to those tip-offs that Bryan just spoke about. But our job also is to be asking powerful questions. And Janice, if we can have the next slide, please.
Cindy, before you go on, I'm sort of wondering if it might be helpful, just take a minute or two to ask, based on what we've shared so far, can you think of other comments or other things that a client might have said to you, or might have said, or might say that you feel might be sort of a potential entree into some shadow exploration?
I wonder about something they might say about, well, when I was younger, I used to do this or be this way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. They might say, as a child, I was never allowed to whatever.
Right. There's some shadow material there. Or an extreme desire that they might express, something that they say is just completely out of their reach, but I have this huge desire to either do this or experience this.
My coworker drives me crazy. I can't, they just get under my skin.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want to strangle somebody.
All right. Any other ideas or ways maybe that you've heard a client say something that might indicate that there's some shadow operating going on?
I think of Paul, that which I would do, I don't do. That which I would say, I don't say. I do say what I shouldn't say. All those.
Yeah. Yeah.
And golden shadow stuff too, right? Like some people might sort of comments that just really praise somebody else, but there's sort of a sense that, that couldn't be me. How do I step out on the stage in a larger way? So, okay. Yeah, we probably should go on, Cindy.
All right. Okay. I put together some coaching questions, some powerful questions that might help unlock, not just to unlock some shadow discovery, but also help people to work with the shadow once it's actually been discovered. And one of them, Janice, if you put the first one up there, is how has this strategy of keeping the shadow hidden, this once you've actually brought to light a shadow that the client is saying, yeah, that's there. How is the strategy of keeping this hidden? How has it served you in the past? Because these things really do serve a very essential purpose for us early in life, when we're vulnerable, when we're completely dependent on other people for our physical and emotional well-being. Putting these things in the shadow actually serves a very powerful purpose of helping us to survive in the world as it is.
It goes back to our programs for happiness.
Yeah, the programs for happiness.
Okay.
So they help us very imperfectly. They help us get what we need from of those programs for happiness. So how has this strategy served you? Ask the client and help the client think through the positive things that this strategy of keeping the shadow hidden has served them. What has it done for them? How have they benefited from it? And then a second question, following up on that one, is how might this strategy be hindering you in the present? Because the very thing that served us so well when we were young and vulnerable and at the mercy of the forces and the people around us, now we're no longer in that situation. Now we have the wisdom and resources of maturity and adulthood, and we don't need to have those programs for happiness is fulfilled in the same ways that we had to when we were young, a child and vulnerable child. We don't need that anymore. So instead of being something that is helping us, it actually hinders us. It becomes a limiting rather than protecting reality. And it becomes a controlling reality in our lives rather than a serving reality. It doesn't serve us any longer. It has moved to the place of actually controlling us and limiting us. Another one might be, Bryan spoke about how the father welcomed home the prodigal son. How might you welcome home these shadow aspects of yourself? The prodigal son received a ring and a robe and a party and a full welcome back into the family as he was. There was no demand by anybody that he change or anything like that. He was just received as he was. How might you do that? Think through some concrete ways that you might welcome this shadow aspect of yourself home. Another one might be to think through some what might be a resource that is contained in this shadow element. Like we talked about with the prodigal son, that his sense of adventure, his sense of his ability to take a risk, his desire to, as someone said, to get out there and see more of reality rather than staying safely confined within the confines of the rules that have always been something that protected them. What might be a resource of this shadow that you've uncovered that is some of the resources that you can draw on now as an adult that are contained in that shadow. Next one, how might that resource be of value to you and to others? And a scripture passage that I thought of when I was thinking about this question is Philippians 2:13, where it says, Paul says, it's God who works in you to will and to act according to his good, in order to fulfill his good purpose. So God has put these resources in us for a purpose to express into the world. We're God's delivery system of his goodness and his love and his grace in the world. So how might this resource be something that would actually be of value to others? He did the work of perfectly creating us for our purpose, and we can't even know what that purpose is, and let alone how to fulfill it, unless we engage all of who we are. And then finally, how might you embody that resource in the coming week? Let's put it into concrete Janice, if you want to put up the next one. How might we embody that? How might we put it into concrete action? Think of one thing this week that you can do in your current situation that will embody a resource that you found in this shadow element of who you are. So I want to ask all of you, can you think of other questions that might either help to either uncover a shadow or help a client who has seen their shadow to work with it and integrate it? Anybody? I think I see somebody down there in the chat. Okay, moving on from there, there are a few action steps I wanted to bring up. Janice, the next slide section. A two-chair conversation between yourself and the screen. Bryan mentioned the screen, how someone else carries for us the shadow that we don't recognize in ourselves. And once we recognize that shadow, a good idea is to sit across from an empty chair and you assume the role of who you've always known yourself to be, and allow yourself to have a conversation between you and that screen, and then switch roles. First you play the role of who you know yourself to be, and then the second one, switch roles and become the screen. And then another one is to journal or list ways this strategy served you and ways it has limited you. Put it in concrete language, put it on paper. How has this served you, and how is it hindering you in the present? And really appreciate the ways that it has served you. Even though it is limiting you now, it has served you well in the past. And then the third one would be design a ceremony and carry out a welcome home ceremony. Ceremonies really help to seal new realities into our minds, and it can be very personal, very individual, make it very meaningful. You might give yourself a secret name as part of your ceremony. I'm thinking of Gideon received sort of a name of mighty warrior, where he had considered himself to be the smallest and the weakest of his clan. Jacob, we find Jacob receives the name of Israel. He goes from being the heel catcher, the one who followed his brother out of the womb, and now he's Israel, the God wrestler. And then I think of Simon, who Jesus renamed Peter, the rock. So you might give yourself a new label, a new name that you can carry with you, and to remind you that this reality now has been incorporated into who you are. So I think we're out of time.
Yeah. right up to the finish line. So we got 5 minutes left. So
I was just going to say, this is Dana. You made me think of, in addition to a sort of welcome home ceremony, that part before it, I thought about a retirement ceremony for the ways it's no longer able to serve you as it did in the past.
Excellent. Yes. Excellent. A retirement and reassignment. You get a new assignment.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or observations or comments about anything that we've said?
Please, Beth, I can't wait to listen to the replay.
Good, thank you. This is a lot to cover. We've done whole retreat weekends. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So Cindy and I are about to lead a 2-day retreat with people on shadow work. So sometimes the coaching work can really lead to a more extensive experience. And for us, this is really kind of an emerging thing. So if anybody wants to be part of an ongoing dialogue about this, if this really intrigued you, please let us know. We'd love to sort of be in dialogue and love to have this become a wider use tool, because I think for me, transformation has its juice. I mean, coaching has its juice in transformation kinds of things. So, and I think shadow has been profoundly helpful for people to actually take steps they never even had thought about because they weren't aware of the shadow materials.
I'd like, for those of you on the phone, I'd like to let you know that in the group chat, Cheryl Ann Elfond says, do any of you have space for pro bono clients? I have a parishioner I will no longer be able to coach since I'm leaving my current church. And if you do, please send that to info@presbyteriancoachnetwork.org, and I'll make sure that Cheryl Ann gets that. I'm going to let Dana thank our presenters. And
I just have one question, Janice.
Go for it.
How do we see this again? I heard somebody mention the replay. Is that stored somewhere?
This is Dana. What I'm doing with the recordings at this point is turning them into YouTube videos. And right now I don't have a mechanism for the best way to get those to folks. So what I would ask is, if you want it in the very short term, please send me an email. And I am dana@suttoncoaching.com, or you could reach me through the Presbyterian Coach Network email account if you need to. And I will send you a link directly to that video once I get it processed and uploaded.
And the commercial that goes with that is that the recordings are available for those who are paid members of the Presbyterian Coach Network, that we let all Presbyterian coaches hear the presentations live. But if you have not sent in your membership for this year, please let us know at info@presbyteriancoachnetwork.org, and we will send you the information on how to get yourself active again for this year. Do we have a closing word, Dana?
We do now. It is the closing word is wholeness. Let me tell you about what's coming up next month. On June 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern, our usual time, we will be featuring Phil Berge. Some of you may know Phil Berge. He has taught in some different coaching programs, including, I guess, at Auburn, is involved with the Columbia Seminary program at this point, is a coach and a consultant as well. I know him through his work with our synod, the Synod of the Trinity. He says that his primary work focuses on walking alongside senior leaders and their teams to design customized processes to help them learn and grow in specific areas of leadership and organizational success. That's his background. What he'll be talking to us about in June is the relationship between coaching and systems theory. And what he has said he will focus on is multiple theoretical approaches to coaching with an emphasis on systemic dynamics. And so beginning with a brief overview of general systems theory, which probably most of us have at least some passing acquaintance with that, he will survey a number of theoretical approaches and facilitate conversation about how and why coaches use some form of systems thinking in nearly any approach, and how using systems theories benefits both coach and client when viewed more intentionally. Especially, I think, for those of us who work with people in ministry or in any kind of organizational leadership, some systems learning is incredibly powerful and helpful. So I hope you can join us for our June meeting. We will not have meetings in July or August, so that will be our last meeting until September. Any other announcements, Janice? Anything else we need to mention?
The other thing to let you all know, if you would like a certificate for a resource development CCEU for your certification renewal, then please send an email with the opening and closing word to certificate@presbyteriancoachnetwork.org. That's certificate@presbyteriancoachnetwork.org.
And do that quickly, right, Janice?
Please, I really would appreciate it in the next 24 hours so I can do them all at the same time and not have to keep going in and out of the system.
Right. And since we got sidetracked for a moment there, I do definitely want to offer a sincere word of appreciation and thanks to Cindy and Bryan for a fascinating presentation. We did in my coach training program, we did some work around gremlin work, and it reminded me of that, but I think offers some helpful perspectives that I didn't get in thinking about it through the language and the guise, if you will, of gremlins. So thanks so much for that, and great to
thank you for the opportunity
and hear from everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody. Have a good month.
All right.
Bye everyone.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.